Creating robust business intelligence in your company is absolutely crucial to the success and future success of your business. Will it be around in 5, 10, or 15 years? Yet one of the biggest challenges is being able to get all of the data from all of these disparate sources into one central location so that you can actually run really good BI. Well, today we're going to talk about how you solve that problem of getting all of the data from all of these disparate sources into one place. I'm William Glass, CEO and co-founder of Ostrich, and of course your host of Silicon Alley. And my guest today is Michel Tricot. He is the founder of Airbyte, an open source aggregation tool that is actually bringing all of the data from these disparate sources into one place, and how they're using the power of crowdsourcing and the open source software movement in order to do that. They built a business model around this idea and have had a ton of success, though not without their stumbling blocks. First, having a huge failure that luckily the team was able to overcome. I'll let Michel tell that story. So if you haven't already, go ahead and pound that subscribe button so you get notified when episodes of the Silicon Alley podcast air every Friday. Without further ado, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Silicon Alley podcast featuring the Michel Tricot. Are you interested in growing and scaling your business? Welcome to the Silicon Alley podcast, where you'll hear from entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, and top performers on what it truly takes to grow and scale a business. You'll walk away with actionable insights you can apply in your own business and life. Now to William Glass, the CEO and co-founder of Ostrich, and your host of the Silicon Alley podcast. Michel, welcome to the Silicon Alley podcast. Super excited to have you on today.
Thank you, William. Super happy to be there.
Yeah. So I want to dive into your background. You've got a lot of interesting things that you've done, a really awesome company that we'll talk about, Airbite, and a journey as an engineer. But I detected an accent there. Are you from France? Can you kind of explain your journey of how you ended up in San Francisco and Silicon Valley?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, indeed, I am from France. And I started college in 2002. And I was working in I was doing CS studies, and of course at that time, like everything, all the new things were coming from San Francisco, from the Bay Area, from the Silicon Valley, etc., etc. And it's always been a life goal to get there, to just be where things are happening. And in 2007, I did actually an internship. So it was not in the Bay Area. It was on the East Coast in Princeton. I was doing some medical imaging, and that was my first actual trip in the US. I stayed there for a year and a half, and then visa things, I had to go back to Paris, work from Paris for a few years, and then finally figure out how to get into the place where I wanted to be. That has been an interesting journey. And I've been here for 10 years now.
For 10 years now. Okay. So you made it happen, it sounds like.
Exactly.
Have you always been interested in computer science and engineering? Can you talk to me a little bit about kind of like your early interest and career that ultimately landed you where you wanted to be?
Yeah. I mean, I could go very, very far in the past. I remember I was actually born in Switzerland, and I had a family of friends, and their dad was like in the first computers, and they had like so many computers in the house I had known. And I just always wanted to go to their place. Back in the day, we were playing like Prince of Persia and other type of games, but that was my first, or Tetris, that was my first exposure to computers. And then when I was just before I started high school, I did some summer job to actually buy my first computers. And that's where I really got really, really deep into it. That's where I started programming. I was doing, but one thing that has always interested me is like about collecting data, like whether it's collect data about like, whether it's like movies or music or things like that. And like the collection, and like how can you actually leverage that asset later on. And that's been my early step. And then yes, I went to CS and was very, very, that's basically where I learned everything I do today. And yeah, it's been a very, very exciting field and a big revolution.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And being interested in data is a great place to be in, with the amount that we're collecting, whether it's structured, unstructured data, and thinking about how everyone's talking about making data-driven decisions and wanting to take actionable steps based on the information they're collecting. But I'll say early on, collecting data, I don't think is that super sexy, right? It's not like one of the things that at least early on that people were really focused on. Where did that love of data and interest in data come from?
You can almost bring that back to people who wrote the first encyclopedia. It's about collecting data to extract knowledge and to expose it to other people. And yes, there is like a very laborious effort in like collecting all these different pieces of data, but then the fact that you're doing it and you're putting a lot of thought into how you collect that data and how you post-process it and how you make it available, it just allows you to get a new vision of the world. Like the data is backing the reality. The reality is backing the data, but the data allows you to have your own vision on the reality, and that allows you to make the right decision. So it's an enabler for making the right decision. So it might not sound sexy, but in the end, it's not for nothing that data is growing so much and there is so much interest into data. Like people are realizing how important it is for the success of their organizations.
Yeah, Michel, when you compare it to the encyclopedia and understanding knowledge, it definitely is a lot more. It makes a lot of sense as to why data is so powerful. Can you talk a little bit about how businesses and startups should be using data, can be using data? Because as especially a lot of the audience are early stage entrepreneurs, it can be tough to gather, collect, analyze, and get meaningful insights out of data. So can you talk a little bit about some of the best practices and things that companies should be thinking about?
Yeah. So I think especially when you start up, so obviously I have a bias because Airbite is very data oriented because we are all about collecting data, but you need to invest into you need to figure out what are the least amount of effort you need to do to start collecting data, because collecting data, it compounds over time. So even if for some time it's data that is laying around, that's fine, because at some point you will hit a step in the life of your company that will allow you to do something with that particular data. And maybe it's a mess for now, that is fine. You will find people that are able to extract something from it. But it's as a startup, I would say it depends on your size, but it's really about first the collection. And then once you have the collection, you can start to decide what you want to do with it. And it can be using application like segments that allow you to very quickly figure out like who is visiting your website, who is using your product. And then this allows you the collection. And then you can plug any tool on top of it. And you can start figuring out, oh, I have this question. Let's look at the data I've collected and see if I can answer it. And it's just about making decisions based on what you've collected and just plugging the right tool for the stage of your company.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense when you explain it that way. And even if you're not using it right away, start collecting some data that you think will be valuable in the future, or, once you've got a certain amount of it. And I like how you explain that it's almost compounding, right? If you just decide all of a sudden you haven't been collecting data for, a year, and then all of a sudden, all right, well, let's make some data-driven decisions, and you have no data, then it's like you're right back at that day one. You might as well have had no customers. So you've got to start all over. So I like that kind of idea of even if you're not using it right away, start collecting data. And
collecting data also helps not just on like how you build a product or the decision you make, but if you're a startup, you need to raise money. If you're backing a lot of your strategy and your growth on VC money, and VC want to see data, and data is not something you collect. If you want to show them a growth of users, you need to have collected when users are coming and are joining your platform or your product. So it's not just for building the product. It is also for like any type of communication that you're doing with people.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And thinking about, VCs making decisions based on the data you have. And if you have no data, then that shows a little bit about you as a founder. If they're a data-driven VC, then which most are, that's not going to look good and not going to be easy to raise capital if you don't have that information. So what are some of the pieces of data that you would recommend collecting? And again, I know it'll be a little bit, it'll be different for every business. But what are some of the things that are foundational when you think about collecting data?
It always depends on what product you're building. for us, we're collecting data, and we're collecting two types of data mostly. Like, first one is we have put some effort in like how we onboard, like how people onboard into our product, because we need to understand what, like, the first impression is the most important in your product, because that's, if you have a good first impression, then it drives also a little bit of how you see the rest of the product. And we're collecting a lot on like this onboarding, the onboarding data. So we understand like where are people dropping off, where are people spending a lot of time, and it allows you to fine tune this experience so that people have the best first experience. And then it's also about how people are using. So we collect typically Airbyte for Airbyte, and maybe we can talk about what Airbyte is, but we try to understand like how many connection people are establishing. We're trying to understand like the diversity of the sources that they are using, or the diversity of destination that they're using, because it gives us a good sense of how people, like how deep we're going into the organization, like how important do we become for these teams when they leverage Airbyte. And it allows us as well then to identify, are they the right people to talk to get feedback or to get information, like live information from them. So I would say these are the two main places where we collect data. And then obviously everything around like website traffic, to understand like where people are coming from, what articles are getting a lot of traction. So we understand like what type of content people enjoy reading and where they're learning something. And
yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah. So when it comes to the actual product itself, it's that onboarding process and then usage, where people spending their time, what are they getting value, where are people dropping off if they don't have a great first impression, and then the analytics around how people are finding us, what do they find valuable. That all makes sense. So Michel, I think at this point, it probably makes sense. Could you talk a little bit about Airbyte and explain what it is that you do and why we started talking about data? Because I think that will help frame the conversation today.
Yeah. So what Airbyte is, it's an open source data integration platform. So it's basically a product that allows you to centralize and replicate all your data asset wherever it is. So it can be like, in general, companies have a ton of data, whether it's on databases, on files, on SaaS services, and all this data is super fragmented. And in general, when you want to make the best decision, you need to actually start joining all this data together, and you want to centralize it so that you can have a full view, for example, of your customers or of your finances across many different services. And what Airbyte does is it builds this pipe and allows you to replicate the data in a data warehouse or a data lake, so that then organization can start put their data analyst, data scientist, or analytics engineer on top of this warehouse and start extracting insight from this data and make data-driven decisions.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. So essentially you could almost think of it as a funnel where you're taking data from all these different sources and putting it in that one central location, so you can start to make decisions and Correct. Get into the intelligence side.
Yep, exactly.
So what led you to start Airbyte? What was it that made you want to centralize and make it easy for people to get all their data in one place?
So first of all, as I told you, I'm very, it's something I've done for myself, like trying to gather data from many places and just having this knowledge sitting on my hard drives. But I really got my real professional experience with data right out of college, where I was working in a financial software, like financial data company called FactSet. And over there, I was working in like the estimate database. And the estimate database is about establishing all this feed of data, centralizing it into FactSet, and getting all the analyst prediction about companies. And then by having all this data actually consolidated into one place, gives you a much better sense of how analysts, how the market is thinking about this company. And because of that, now you can create reports, you can create analysis to make better investment decisions. So that was my first thing, which is pulling this data, doing the quality and exposing it like to traders. The next step is then, that's when I went into the US. I started back in the day, a small startup called Liveramp. And Liveramp is a middleware company that is really about activating customer data that you might have and allowing their customers to reach these people wherever they are, online, on a tablet, on a phone, for advertising or for like other purposes. And it's basically you have to integrate this customer data across like the fragmentation of the MarTech and AdTech ecosystem. So I stayed there for 6 years. I was leading a team of 30 people. I was director of engineering and head of integration. And we had to build like thousands of connectors, whether it's like from pulling data from our customers or for pushing data into all these ad and marketing platform. And I would say that's where I got my largest scars on what does it mean to centralize data, to export this data, and like all the little nitty-gritty details of building connectors. And then I did another startup. So yeah, Liveramp is now a public company. And after that, I went and joined another company. This one was same thing, ingesting data, exposing it to user around like self-driving cars, like mapping technologies. And that's when I really thought, okay, there must be something that I can do to provide an infrastructure that people can start using to replicate this data. And with John, my co-founder, we started to really brainstorm about this problem space. And that's how we came up with the idea of Airbyte.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Yeah, it makes sense with your background and interest area. So what would you say is the main problem, if you're going to summarize it? Like, what is the problem that you actually solve for your customers?
Having access to your data. It is fragmented. And companies get more and more tools, more and more systems where you have data that is siloed. And we want to allow people to not have to think about how they de-silo that data and how they make the most out of it. And then you have like all the technical problems that come with it, because you can, if you want, you could build what we do is Airbyte, but you could build it internally. The problem is there is a science behind how you build a connector, because a connector is what we call a 1,000 paper cut problem. Is everybody that it is always going to break. And it means that now you have a team that is building connectors, and every week, every day, they have to fix connectors because it relies on an external system that you have no control on. And yeah, you need to fix it. You need to adapt to how this system is working. And you end up creating like very large teams in your organization to just do the data integration part. And we think that this is something that can be taken out of the organization, and we can share the burden of the maintenance and the creation of this connector with an open source community.
Yeah, no, that's really, really interesting, Michel. And I think when you specifically mention the silos, right, there's so many different systems that, you talk about shadow IT, where marketing buys their own solutions for X, Y, and Z because they can't get engineering resources. And this is in larger companies where you tend to have this, but it happens even in, smaller startups. I can't, the number of tools that we use with the size of our company is insane, right? So being able to, bridge the gap between the information that you've got and all these different systems into one place makes a lot of sense. And when you explain the problem with, a connector, right? Salesforce decides to change the way that their API works. And now all of a sudden you're not getting data from Salesforce, and you've got to go figure that out. It takes away from everything else. So it makes sense in terms of the problem that you're solving. I'm curious. So you've mentioned this a couple of times, it's open source. Can you explain to me the open source model of how Airbyte works being an open source solution?
So before we started to develop Airbyte, what we did is we talked to customers of existing solution, and all the existing solutions are like closed source solution. And what happened, I think we talked to around 50 different companies. And what was very interesting during these user interviews is 100% of them are paying, obviously, for these solutions, but at the same time, they are rebuilding something internally and there are a few reasons for that. The first one is the connectors, they don't exist in the platform that they are paying for. Second one is it doesn't behave the way they want. So they might be missing some records or some type of information that they need to do their analysis. Third one was more around like the control of the data. Like most of these solutions, they require these companies to exfiltrate the data to third-party infrastructure. And the last one, there was also a cost issue. So for like high scale type of sources, they would not use this solution because they were way too expensive. So, and that goes against like the principle behind data integration. And at that point, we thought, okay, to address the long tail of connectors and to have the customizability, you need to involve people into the development of your connectors. And there are mechanisms that work very well for that. And open source is the best one. And so that's why we thought, okay, what we're going to do is create like the tooling and like the glue to make these connectors work. And we're going to let the community use this glue, use these tools, and just if they are missing a connector, they can just add it, and suddenly they don't have to maintain that connector anymore. Like the community will for them. And so it's like this win-win between them and the community where you can spread the load of the maintenance.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense as to why you would go with the open source model. Just quickly, so we don't lose anyone, in case people aren't familiar with open source, can you just quickly define what open source is?
Yeah, of course. So there are different definitions. Our definition of open source is we are giving access to the code, and we are also providing the proper license on the software so that people can just take the code, take the project, and just run it onto their infrastructure. And we allow them also to contribute to the source code. Like some very good example of successful open source are just Linux, where just almost the whole world, like server world is running on. It's just, these are problems that are so big that is very hard for one single company to address it. And like solving the fragmentation of the data is not possible for one single company. You need to have the help of many, many, many organizations, and that goes with open source.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, Michel. How do you make money then, right? If you're giving away the source code for free, anyone can contribute to it. How does Airbyte make money?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few things here. So first of all, we have our own philosophy on what should be open source and what should not. And the way we're thinking about it, especially as we're solving a problem of data engineers, which is not have to build connectors and not have to maintain them. Everything that basically beneficiate to an individual or a small team is open source. And it's basically how people just take the code and can start playing with it and start deploying it in production and have like a very small use case. But then as this software grows in usage within the organization, this type of feature around like role access management and like scale, being able to monitor it, and all of that, like compliance, privacy, these are things that people as an individual, they don't really care, but the organization does. And that's where we're building like this paid feature. We're also having a cloud version of Airbyte that we're working on and that we're going to launch in September, where people don't have to manage infrastructure and we just do it for them.
Got it. No, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense in terms of how you're able to provide the free core offering and have still make money as a company on top of that. So I think you've sort of alluded to this, but just to clarify, because when I first saw Airbyte, the first thing that I jumped to, and I know they're a little bit different, but was like a Zapier, right? They're really well known connecting no code, low code. You can just, plug in the API keys to whatever tools and you can connect however, I don't know how many different services that they have. So it's essentially a connector. How do you differentiate yourself from Zapier and those types of tools like?
Yeah, I would say Zapier, Tray, and that kind of tools, they are more like workflow manager, where what you do is they have a way of receiving like small pieces of data. I mean, it's not the same scale also. Like with something like Airbyte, you can take like you can take like hundreds and hundreds of gigabytes, feed them through Airbyte and get it replicated. Here it's more like event driven. And what you do is more you create a workflow. Like if I receive this request, I want to extract that. So it's really in the transformation and activation of the data already. And it's for like smaller scale.
And yeah, gotcha. And Airbyte's more focused on the larger, getting it into a data warehouse or data lake, or where you can start employing like BI type tools, business
Exactly.
intelligent tools on top of it and make decisions. So the scale is very different.
Exactly.
Can you talk a little bit about business intelligence, some of the tools, some of the things that you've seen companies or you're enabling through Airbyte?
Yeah. Yeah. So there are a few things that we've seen is like, so the first one is the 360 view of customers. You have a lot of touch points with your customers, whether it's when they land on your website, when they click on an ad, when you first talk to them. And all of that goes across many, many, many different tools, up to the point where they go on Stripe and they start paying you. And you want to understand, like many companies want to understand like the full journey of these users.
Mm-hmm.
And unless you can replicate this data and centralize it somewhere, you will be missing pieces. So you might not optimize the right places. And that's where we're helping people just centralize like all the touch points that they might have with customers across all the platforms. Also, it can be your own internal database. Like you have information that nobody else has. And how do you get everything into your warehouse? So I would say that's one use case. Another one, and this one was something that we did not really thought about when we started Airbyte, which is there are a lot of companies who are building product to deliver value to their users. The problem is that their product needs to have access to their customers' data. For example, we're working with some e-commerce like analytics companies, and to provide analytics about e-commerce to their own customers, they need to connect to their Shopify, Amazon account, etc., etc. They don't want to be building these connectors. What they want is to focus on how can I give the best analytics and the best insights to my users. And at that point, what Airbyte becomes is we are setting ourselves to be their connectivity layer for the product. So we're more like an enabler of their product more than a product by itself. And we become like integrated into their product. And now they can start pumping data on behalf of their customers.
That makes a lot of sense, and I like those use cases because I see a ton of value, as you said, because it allows the analytics companies that's really their focus. Instead of trying to figure out how do we get all the data, and we can focus on providing really, really deep analytics in the example that you gave for our e-commerce customers, so that they can make better decisions. And that's really what makes them different. Not just can I connect to the right data that I need to even be able to perform the analysis and analytics.
And also one thing that is important is I think the landscape of data analytics and BI has changed a lot. Like it used to be something that only people with technical skill would be able to do. Mm-hmm. And the problem is then the cost of asking a question to your data is extremely expensive. And you don't go as deep as you can because suddenly you have to talk to engineers who also are working on the product or are working on other part of like the stack. And asking a question is fine. But then one question generally leads to 10 other questions. And that's what we've seen is like with warehouses, with dbt, with how mature everything that is downstream of the warehouse is becoming, is that suddenly organization can hire roles that are less technical, but extremely, extremely data savvy. And like we see like this new trend of removing a lot of this analytics from the data engineering world and moving it into the analytics world and analyst world. And you need to give them access to like simple tool where they can start replicating data into warehouses so that they can answer all the questions that they might have.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, that shift, right? Going where you don't have to be as technical in terms of getting the data from one place to another, but you're really just focused on doing the analysis. And that's really where the key focus is on being a really good data analyst versus just getting it all in one place. So what are so you mentioned you're seeing this trend. Are there specific tools, obviously Airbyte helping support that trend as well, but what are some of the analytics tools that you think are really good, that are kind of game changing for startups, companies that are just starting out, kind of on the maturity scale, early stage?
So definitely DBT is a big game changer. They're focused a lot on the transformation. We focus on extract and load, but DBT has changed how analytics engineers are actually thinking about data and like the quality effort that is being put into all this analysis. Because it's a basic wearable now to bring like the best practices of software engineering into the analytics world. But then in terms of tools, I think you have like all the dashboarding to like the Looker, the Tableau, the superset metabase of the world that are just being really, really good and are enabling these new roles to be less technical and do a lot of this data and like exposing that data to the rest of the organization. And you have also this new trend, I think, like it's called reverse ETL, which is more about like how do you activate the data. So typically, if you centralize all your data, you can do BI. You can try to understand what people are doing. But sometimes what you want to do is you want to join data that is coming from your internal database with your Salesforce data. And this way you can start adding more dimension to all of your users. And then what you would want is to just propagate that information now into Salesforce so that your sales team can do better outreach, better communication with their future customer or existing customers. And that's a new trend that we're seeing, which is warehouses are becoming like this central place. And now you can feed this data into SaaS application and enable like adding more data to these tools so that you can make even better decision. And then you create this feedback loop of continuously improving your data knowledge and your knowledge.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So not just getting all the data in one place and then being able to analyze it and then saying, okay, now let's go back, but actually marrying that data in more real time so that you can make better decisions and make the sources where certain pieces of data sit to be more robust so that you can, again, as you said, like in Salesforce, make better decisions because you're marrying your own internal usage with your Salesforce data so you can understand why or what a customer really gets value out of your product or service.
Yep, exactly.
So is Airbyte connecting both ways or is it just bringing it in?
So today we are only bringing it in, but at the same time, we open source. We have a protocol for exchanging data between sources and destination. And we're starting to see some contributor adding these reverse ETL type of destination.
Yeah, that makes sense. So in terms of building an open source community, how do you do that, right? It's not necessarily the easiest thing to do, but how are you building and growing the open source community, the contributors? What's kind of your thinking around developing that community?
Yeah. So first of all, we have two types of members in our community. We have our users and we have our contributors, and they require different type of communication, and they expect something different from us. Of course, because we're building connectors, we are putting a lot of effort on like the contributor community because we want to make sure that we are growing like this engine to crowdsource the maintenance and the creation of connectors. But our users in the end are like people that are maybe a little bit less technical, but that know exactly what to do with the data. Now, in terms of like growing the community, what's interesting is we started from zero in last September. First of all, we are spending a lot of time talking with people in data teams. So they became the first member within our community. We were spending all of our days talking with data teams, trying to understand their problem. And after that, it's really about how do you invite them into your roadmap? Like what problem are you solving for them? And it's always the same thing. Like we can say that we have found like an equivalent to a product market fit for open source would be like a project market fit, where we are solving a problem that data engineers are really suffering with, and we're solving it for them. And then it's about producing the content that makes sense to them, like how to best leverage Airbyte, how to build your data stack, and showing like inspiring people, or like just sometimes it's just training people on what they can do now that they have this new power in their hands. And yeah, after that, it's just engaging. You know, we spend a lot of time like helping people on our Slack. I think today we have more than 2,000 people on our Slack, and they ask questions. We are here to answer them, and we can help them on like deploying Airbyte, starting a data stack, etc., etc. So it's really about engaging with them. Like that also informs how we should build a product, like what matters.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Yeah, just by supporting your customers, you're understanding what the challenges are, where people are getting stuck, where they need support. Also, the types of users, to your point, right? The users are different than the contributors in terms of who they are, their skill sets, what they want, what they need. So, Michel, when you went to deploy and launch Airbyte in September of last year, had you already built out a lot of the infrastructures, the team, so that there was something to work off of? Like, how did that work exactly?
It was an MVP.
Okay.
So the thing is, that's how we think as a company. Not everybody thinks the same way, but what we want is to put things in the hands of people so we get immediate feedback about what works, what doesn't. And so what we did is we worked for like 2 months. Actually, today, it's our 1 year anniversary of us starting the Airbite project. But in end of September, what we had was very bare bone UI, very bare bone scheduling, and we had like 6 connectors, 3 sources, 3 destination, barely working, but we just put it there. And then what we did is we reached out to all the data teams that we've talked to in the past, and we say, this is Airbyte, this is a prototype. What do you think? What do you understand of what we're trying to solve there? And actually, just at the moment we sent that email, we started to get people using Airbyte. And then these people were testing, they gave us a lot of feedback, and they promoted at some point to becoming like production users, where for maybe one specific pipeline, they were using Airbyte to replicate data from a Postgres to a BigQuery. And then you just grow like that. You want to put things as quickly as possible into the world and gather feedback. As long as you're very honest about the quality of it. I mean, we are saying that this is a very, very, very alpha version. So it is going to break, but if you follow exactly this instruction, it is going to work.
Yeah.
But then you discover all these edge cases, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, no, I like that. It makes sense. Yeah, being able to build something bare bones that's useful, but even the customer research that you did before you even launched enabled you to have people using the product, it sounds like almost immediately after you sent out the email. So yeah, it all kind of tied together in terms of how you've gone about building Airbyte. And at this point, you've raised capital. Can you talk a little bit about that process and how you've gone about building the company?
Yeah. So at that time when we released Airbyte, the first time we were 1, 2, 3, 4. We were 6 people in the company, and we did a soft launch. We've always done soft launch, which is just reaching out to close network or like some publication or some Slack groups about Airbyte, just to get not too many people that we cannot handle, but at the same time to make sure we reach out enough people to try Airbyte. And we did this soft launch, and as soon as we did it, we started to receive a ton of requests from VC. I think like the data space also is extremely, extremely hot at the moment, and which makes sense. Like I think companies are just realizing how important data is to their core business, and access to data is an unsolved problem today. Like everything around BI, that's pretty mature, but everything around access to data is just nascent. And so we're starting to get all these VCs talking with us. And what we did is we just told them, we're not raising money today. Let's all meet during that week. I think it was the week of the 15th of November. And what we did is we basically talked to all the VC that had contacted us. And what we want, at the time, we were not really looking for capital, but what we were looking was really about what partner understands the vision, understands why open source is the only way to solve this particular problem. And you don't want to be, again, like you don't want to have to explain to a VC why open source is important for that problem. You need them to have enough baggage to understand that, yes, it's a hard problem and open source is a solution. And that's how we actually found Accel, which was, and you also want to talk with the partner that are elevating your thinking and like challenging you on questions that are very important and that you might not have realized. And Accel did that for us. And so we ended up raising with them. We announced it in February, and we raised 5 million at that time. And then we started to have like similar conversation with, at that time, like the growth was going really, really high. I think at that time we had over 1,000 companies that have used Airbite to replicate data. And today we're around 4,000. But during that February to May, we also had conversation with other VCs around about Airbite, and we ended up raising a Series A with Benchmark in May of 26 million.
It's awesome. Yeah. So it's a nice position to be in, right? Where you've got the VCs reaching out to you to start with and seeing that growth. Cause it's not, not the typical story and the situation that you're in, right? The way that you've gone about building the product, talking to customers early on before you even built anything, and then using that data and then reaching back out to those customers. I think it tells a really good story of how other founders can think about raising capital based on your journey. So I know it can't all have been smooth sailing, right? So can you talk about some of the challenges that you faced along the way?
Yeah, and also one thing is we were collecting data since the beginning, so it made it a lot easier for us to build like the story about what Airbite is and how quickly we were growing. Like we were collecting all this information, so we knew how much people were using Airbite. Like the problem with open source is you might not know who's using you, but if you have just enough instrumentation to do that, you might be missing on like 20% of them, but you still have this 80% that are showing you the trend of usage. Yes, it hasn't, I mean, I say that, so we're July 27th, it's 1 year anniversary of Airbyte, but we started the company in January. So during these 7 months, we had quite an interesting experience. So we did YC over the first 3 months of the year. And what happened is we knew what problem space we wanted to address. We didn't know what solution we had, but we knew the problem space: data integration, access to data. And we started on a project that was more marketing related and starting to get some nice traction. And on March 15, I think, when the US closed down because of COVID, all the marketing budget got frozen. We're unable to close the deals that we had. And that's when with John, we realized that the product that we were building was a good to have. It's like something that is just a little bit better than what they had. And now you can build a successful company with a good to have, but that's not what John and I had in mind. So what we did is just made this very hard decision of shifting. I think it was in May, of saying, okay, this product is not going to work. We have to shut it down, and we have to think about what are the next steps for us. And then we went through this research phase where we're trying to understand like problem spaces and what existing solutions there were. And obviously, both John and I have a lot of experience, like what does it mean to do data integration? That's how we came out with Airbite. But these months were not easy. And we had like 3 our founding engineers with us. And when you have a team also that has been working a lot on the previous project, and you have to tell them we're shutting it down, it's not going to work. And then, but what do we do next? Say, let's discover it together. It's a hard situation to be in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it puts in the the quick funding rounds and quick succession into context that it wasn't like, you had the right idea. It was, we built this other thing that didn't work, and COVID completely changed our business and shut us down. How did you keep the team inspired and focused, knowing that they'd just spent all of this time and effort, and you were saying, all right, well, we've got to scrap this?
They knew what they were in for. So I would say, I mean, these are people that also I've worked with in the past, and it's also a matter of like transparency. When they joined Airbyte early on, I think 2 were in January, 1 was in like beginning of March, like just before we had to go to like that COVID hit. And it's just, we told them like, the project that you're working on right now might not exist in 6 months. So they knew.
Yeah.
Now you also have a limited amount of bullets that you can use for that. So you cannot just change idea every single week. And also they have an entrepreneur mindset where they are here to discover. They know that they are not working on a project that has proven itself already. And they know that they are necessary to make it prove itself. That's just a matter of their expectation.
Yeah. No, that sounds like it's a mixture of having a team that knows what they're in for, that understand that in an early stage startup, you're going to move, things are going to change. What you're building now may not be what it is going to be in the future. And then just being able to, as a leadership team, set a right direction that everyone can get behind.
Yeah. And I would say, like, until you've had like some very strong signal that you're building the right product, you should be careful about not hiring too fast and too much, because the more people you have, the harder it is to shift. And you want to stay very nimble for as long as you can. So you can do very fast decision and boom, you do something else, and you don't have to spend 1 month to get people to turn to the new direction.
That makes sense. Yeah, not hiring ahead of your needs and getting too bloated, especially as you said, early stage, limited resources. Yes, you want people, but the more that you have, the harder it is. And your runway shorter, right?
Also, yes.
Which is always a challenge. Michel, when you think about success, how do you define that? Like, what does success look like for you?
Our goal with Airbite is to become a standard for how you do data integration. So for example, if today I tell you I need to have a scalable queuing and message system, in your head, you're going to think about Kafka. Or if I tell you, okay, I need to do like data warehouse, you're going to think of Redshift, BigQuery, and Snowflake. We want to be that for data integration. And we are really putting all our effort into making sure that we become the standard, and that the day you think about, I have fragmented data that I need to bring somewhere, I need to use Airbite. To me, that is the definition of success. Is like it's about commoditizing data integration, but you want to make sure that you are establishing a standard for what does it mean to do data integration and the quality expected out of it.
Yeah, becoming that gold standard, right? Yeah, within the industry. Michel, for anyone that's listening that is interested, what is the ask? What do you need right now in order to make that vision come true? Like, what are things that if someone's listening, they can do to support Airbite?
So I would say there are two things. First one is we're looking for amazing individual to join the team, whether it's on engineering or it's on like bootstrapping, like how we are going to sell our cloud product, and like people who understand the need and have the motivation to join us and get us to become like the gold standard. And the second one is about if you have any type of data integration issue, just come and talk to us, because we can work with you on like figuring out what is the best solution, whether it's Airbite, whether it's something else. But we, of course, we have a bias toward Airbite, but at the same time, we're also we're data expert behind the scenes. So we've started data organization, and if you have anything that you need, you can join us and spread the word about Airbite.
I love it. Michel, this has been a lot of fun, and I appreciate you diving deep into data integration, open source, and kind of your own journey. I want to leave you with the last words. So if there's anything that you want to leave the audience with, and then how can people connect with you outside of the podcast? Yeah.
So easiest thing to connect with me is you can join our public Slack. I mean, I'm there all the time. Also, I would say that's probably the best way to reach out to us. And you can visit our website, airbyte.io, and you can find like our GitHub, like the team, recipes, everything you need to know about data. And last words, I would say yes, spend time on extracting insight from data, not extract data. I think it's more rewarding for your organization to spend your time on that. Extract insights, not the data.
Yeah, I like that. That fits very, very nicely with Airbite's value proposition and the philosophy that you guys abide by. So yeah, Michel, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you sitting down today.
Thank you, William. Thank you for having me.
On your way out, please share the podcast with others. It's the only way that the community grows and others hear these incredible stories from entrepreneurs and top performers. And of course, pound that subscribe button so you get notified when episodes drop every Friday. I'm William Glass, CEO and co-founder of Ostrich, and of course, your host of the Silicon Alley Podcast. Have a very profitable day. You got no time to waste, but still you hesitate. Caught in a circle saying, I'll never leave this place. Some words got you searching for the bright side over and over until you're looking.